Welcome back to English 101, Rhetoric 1. This is week 5, and we are talking about persuasion and classical argument. Also, before I get too far along, I want to go and just say a little bit more about essay number 3, which is our assignment on ambition and social mobility. So this one will be due week 6 of the class, the rough draft. And so that's we have this next 2 weeks to work on it. And your first task really with this essay is to, as it says, write a brief summary of the short story, just like we've done with our first short story by Hemingway. The summary can be at the first paragraph or it can be integrated in, but somehow you want to have a summary. You could even have your intro and then have the summary. It could be the first body paragraph. There's different ways of doing it, but somehow you want to incorporate the summary into the story. Pay particular attention to what you believe the writer is trying to say about ambition and social mobility in America. So I really want you to, if you can, comment in some way on, some of your ideas connected to the story, but your own personal ideas too about this idea of ambition, wanting to get ahead, wanting to do better, and then the idea of social mobility and how that may be limited for some people and for some reasons. And that's always been kind of a cornerstone of the American dream, is the idea that people could work hard and get ahead. So we're going to comment on that and think about that a little bit. And certainly in the short story, Gino Diaz, I think, is commenting on that idea. So is the writer painting an optimistic, pessimistic, or just kind of a neutral picture? He doesn't really have a strong opinion. You can decide based on your reading, and you can also share your own feelings about that idea of ambition, related to ambition and social mobility. For the response part of the essay, so however you integrate your summary, do that, and then and really with the summary, you're just demonstrating that you understand the story, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. But for the response part of the essay, imagine you're writing to a good friend or maybe a close family member. So our audience, remember, we always want to think about audience, very important. Obviously, I will be reading your paper, and 1 or 2 students with peer response should be reading your paper. But I also want you to imagine you're writing this to a friend or family member. I still want you to use essay format. So don't write it like a personal letter, but you still want to have an introduction, body, conclusion, format it MLA style. But I just want you to think of your audience. Imagine you were going to be sharing this with a friend or family member. Maybe you feel like this friend or family member is not ambitious enough, and so you want to encourage them. Gosh, you're really bright. You could do a lot if you put your mind to it. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they're like a workaholic and they never take time to rest. They never spend time with their friends and family. And you want to tell them, chill out, relax. You'll be fine. There's an old song by Billy Joel called Vienna, telling people we're all going to end up at the same spot. We're going to be old and we're going to be retired. So just relax and enjoy your life. So you could take either side, right? And so this is where these are some ideas for how that might look, but you want to put this in your own terms. But again, you're writing to this person that you care about, friend or family member, and you want to encourage them to be more ambitious or maybe less ambitious. And you want to look at the story for some ideas. You have your characters in the short story that'll be something you can comment on about that. So that's the summary, is this, showing that you understand the story, and then you're trying to convince this friend or family member to be more or less ambitious. Assume your reader is not familiar with your writing assignment. I know, I know this assignment, so it's hard. You have to kind of imagine, because I obviously have read the story several times. I get it. Everybody in our class is reading it. But just assume you're writing the summary for somebody who hasn't. So explain enough so that they will understand what your story is about that you read. Edison, New Jersey. Also assume your reader disagrees with you. So if you're writing to that friend or family member, kind of assume that if you want them to be more ambitious, they're not having it. They're not interested. If you want them to be less ambitious and relax, no, they're super motivated. They're not going to listen to you. So assume they would disagree with you. And we're going to get into what we call answering the opposition, which is one of the 5 methods of persuasion that we've talked about in class some, and we'll talk more about today. It's your job to convince him or her that your view has merit. So your ideas, you have to convince them. To be convincing, you need to be respectful of the author's position. So don't tell them they're dumb for thinking the way they think, obviously. Be respectful, maybe, but imagine that they're pretty skeptical, that they're not agreeing with you. And even if you disagree with him or her, again, be respectful and try to convince them or persuade them. All right, so that's going to lead us into what we call argument, talking about argument a little bit. Argument has several parts that we're going to talk about. This is, by the way, a picture, if you can see this, of Cicero. You might think, that doesn't look like Cicero to me, but this person here is Cicero. I always like to share this when we talk about argument, because he was there on the floor of the Roman Senate in ancient Rome a long time ago, when in Rome they would have spoken Latin, I guess. And he's out there giving his oration or his speech, probably opposing his arch rival Quintilian. But anyway, he was a very famous Roman orator or speaker and politician in his day, and that is where Cicero's name comes. So he's the namesake for the town of Cicero. So I just wanted to share that because he's somebody, when I had to study how to write and how to teach argument, we talked about Cicero quite a bit. So this is just to introduce the topic of argument. Argument is a little bit different than just pure persuasion. I'm going to share a little bit about how that's different. Persuasion just means I want you to do this, and I'm not going to listen to anything else, but I'm going to convince you, and I'm not interested in your opinions. So persuasion is just, selling somebody an idea. Argument's a little bit different than that. We're going to talk about. It's probably different in a lot of ways, but we're going to focus on a few ways that it's different. One of the ways that it's the same, it doesn't matter if you're doing argument or just pure persuasion, you probably have a claim that you're making. Now, these claims are obviously usually stated in our thesis statement. So you have an opinion. In this essay, your opinion is going to be, hey, I think you should be more ambitious, or hey, I think you're too ambitious, take it easy. And you're going to try to support that. In an essay, a claim is often, again, expressed as the thesis statement. That's that one sentence, oftentimes near the end or at the end of the body or the opening of the introduction or the opening of the essay. And one thing I want to share about claims, and we're going to have, part of this will come up as one of our quiz questions later, so this is an important one for that reason, if nothing else. But there's a difference between an absolute claim and a moderate claim. Absolute, just like it sounds, like absolutely, right? It's always true. So if you're trying to tell somebody that ambition is always, always, always good, that might be kind of difficult because there's always exceptions. It seems like there are always exceptions. That's one thing that's absolute. But moderate claims, for me, are usually easier to prove. Doesn't mean you can't write an essay with an absolute claim saying this is always the case. But I think most of the time it's better to say generally this and to be kind of moderate. Something's sometimes true or false. You can take it different ways, but sometimes an absolute claim and not being flexible at all gets you in trouble. This is a picture of, I believe this is Socrates right before he was executed. He wasn't very flexible. Anyway, that's a whole other story, but it's kind of related, I think, in my opinion. All right, so let's go on here. So we're talking about these types of claims. So you can do absolute, moderate. There's also other ways you can write a claim. One of them would be just to say basically something is true. And that's what we call a substantiation claim. This is not going to be on the quiz. I'm just sharing this real quickly. But it is good to know if you're trying to write your thesis that you could sometimes just say, this is true. The job market for those with only a high school diploma is limited. So most people would probably agree with that, but it's still something you'd have to prove. And it's just basically stating that something exists or it's true. Another kind of claim is called an evaluation claim. So again, these are all types of how you might write your thesis statement in your essay. An evaluation claim is when you're actually making a judgment about something. The high graduation rate for athletes at Penn State is a direct result of the school's supportive academic environment. So there I'm basically evaluating Penn State's academic support for their college level athletes that they have, their student athletes. That's evaluating. I'm making a judgment. You can also do a policy claim, and that's where you call for some kind of action. We must establish funding necessary to hire the best qualified high school teacher. So this would be asking the states or school districts or whatever to try to find money to hire the best high school teachers. That's calling for an action. So claim is the core, the central part of any essay. And these are three types that you can write, but then also more important than that is always thinking, am I doing an absolute claim? Am I so inflexible that it's always 100% true? And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but just be aware you're going to have to work a little harder probably to prove an absolute claim than to just say something is sometimes true. It's sometimes better to be ambitious. Let me give you a few examples of times when it's better to be ambitious. I'm not saying always, right? So that's a little easier, this moderate claim. Another important thing, this is whether you're writing an essay that's a persuasive essay or a real argument essay, you are going to share evidence. You're going to do that in the body of the paper, right? And we talked a little bit about ethos, pathos, logos last week. These are ways that you can appeal to your audience by using emotion, using logic or good reasons, or using character or trustworthiness as a way of persuading. So evidence is going to be important. So that's, again, we have this ethos, pathos, logos. These are the different ways. And then we also have, I shared with you 5 methods of persuasion. I think we started talking about this, but I want to do a little bit more with this today and actually spend the rest of our time mostly talking about these methods of persuasion and how you can use facts, examples, referring to an authority, predicting the consequences, and answering the opposition. Here's what's different about an argument, in my opinion. Most important difference, I think, is that when you persuade, you may not consider opposing views. You may just sort of say, this is the reason why you should do this, 1, 2, 3. With an argument, it's really important, I think, to consider opposing views. You might go on to refute them or disprove them, but you want to consider opposing views. And so I'm going to ask you to think about that in this essay, recognizing that probably your friend or your family member who you're writing to may be the opposing view that we're talking about. They may have very different views about ambition and motivation than you do. So you're going to have to really think about that as we work on this argument paper. But in the end, you do want to disprove or refute their views. And notice I really, again, put respectfully. So not calling them names or anything or saying, you're crazy, why are you thinking that? But really thinking of ways you can persuade them rationally and logically. And last of all, you may concede something. Concession is like a kind of a mini surrender, right? You're not really surrendering the bat or the war, but maybe you're saying, okay, on this one point, I agree with you. You're right. Sometimes people can be too ambitious. That can be a problem. I'm not suggesting that. And so you can agree with that one point, but you still, in large, you disagree with what they're saying. So this concession can be really powerful because it shows you're a reasonable person. It builds your ethos, and it shows that you're probably logical and willing to be open-minded as well. So it can really be a good thing to just concede one point. And again, that means accepting the other side. You're arguing for something, right? And let's say you're arguing that we should take more action to prevent climate change from getting worse. And you might acknowledge this is going to be expensive and difficult for people. I agree. However, I still think we have to do something, right? So you concede, you give in something. This is also a part of an argument that I think that's really important. All right. So to do all of this argument, we are going to still have to persuade. So even if we're conceding some points, we're looking at opposing views, we are still going to have to, in the end, persuade our audience. So here we have down here with me, the woman here is trying to convince the guy to eat an apple, right? That's a very basic form of persuasion. She has something that she wants. It's not really an argument in the sense of either a disagreement or a logical argument, but just, I want you to do this, and here's some reasons why you should do it. Each one of these situations might be like because persuasion can be one-on-one, can be a small group, it can be a huge, large audience like this. It doesn't really matter. But when you are trying to persuade someone, well, let's talk about this first. So persuasion is to convince, right? And you see it all the time. It's all around us. TV commercials, college brochures, junk mail, advertisements you see on YouTube or other places, right? So we're always seeing it. We're being persuaded all the time, probably more so than ever in the history of human existence, right? Because there's more ways that 100 years ago it was pretty hard to reach somebody like me, but now that my phone's right next to me, it was actually ringing. I forgot to turn it off. It was some ad was popping up while I was starting this presentation. Somebody trying to persuade me. They want to persuade me to read this story. They want to persuade me to buy this thing. So it's in our faces all the time. We're being persuaded. It's a very important thing. And to understand persuasion, you always want to think about, we talked about this early on in the class with the rhetorical situation, we call it. Think about your opportunity. You're trying to persuade someone to be more ambitious or less ambitious. That's kind of your opportunity. Your audience, well, it's the class and me, but it's also this friend or this family member who you want to persuade. Your purpose to convince them to think about their future a little bit, right? And the context, well, it's around their maybe work life, professional life, or school, or whatever it might be that you're trying to talk about with them. So we have, again, these 5 methods of persuasion. Facts are basically just stating something that is. The one thing about a fact that's really important is that it has to be clear, obviously, and not vague, like everybody knows. That's not the same as a fact. And the best thing about facts, or most important, is can we trace it to some kind of a source? Do we know where this fact is coming from? If you just say everybody knows, well, that's kind of just common sense maybe, but not necessarily a fact. So we want to be able to trace it to a source. It's better if the source is a reputable source. For me, peer-reviewed sources are the best. So if we're doing a research paper, for example, and you needed facts, I would recommend that you go to the library databases where they have lots of peer-reviewed journals where different experts have focused on these things. So examples are, it's important if you're giving an example to support that it's not just Uncle Fred or one person, but it's you're more general. Maybe not 1 or 2 people, maybe 100 people, or even thousands, or a percentage of the population or something is always a little more persuasive. You can refer to an authority, and in an essay, usually we refer to authorities by quoting experts in the field. So we're writing about child psychology. We're probably going to quote somebody who's a psychology professor, a researcher, a doctor, something like that, right? Predicting the consequences, we try to help the reader imagine the future. What will happen if you're more ambitious? If you're more ambitious, you might have a better future. If you're less ambitious, what will happen? If you're less ambitious, you might be more relaxed. You won't die of a heart attack or something from all the stress, right? So there's ways we can predict the future or the consequences of somebody's actions, and that can be really persuasive. Lastly, we can answer the opposition. We know that we're going to assume that the person we're writing for, our imaginary audience, our friend or family member, doesn't agree with us. So how can we prove them wrong? This is all very kind of theoretical. So let's look at it in context, what it actually looks like in more like real examples. So here's some examples you might see using facts. You want to prove that children's eyesight should be checked every year by doctors. So let's just imagine you're writing a paper. You're saying, oh, kids should get an eye test. It's very important. And then you say, for example, many people suffer serious visual impairment later in life because they received insufficient or inadequate eye care when they were children. And this is according to an article in Better Vision. So we could trace the source to this publication, Better Vision, which I think is something that's read by maybe eye doctors and people in that field, right? Ophthalmologists and so on. So this is a fact that a lot of times, and we can trace it to a source and maybe find more information. So that could be a good fact. Let's switch gears just a little bit here. And now imagine I'm writing an essay. I'm your teacher, but I'm writing an essay and I'm trying to persuade all the students in my class. When you go to apply for a credit card, read the fine print on the credit card application, whether it's online or paper or whatever it might be. Read that fine print so you know what you're getting into. So I want to use a fact to try to support you. I want you to take a minute and look at these three choices. And if you wanted to pause the video and read through them, you could do that and see which one of these you think might be a good fact. And I'll just sort of count 1, 2, 3. And if you did pause the video or you didn't, either way, if you're still here, that's good. Credit card companies are run by greedy people who just want to take your money. Well, I don't know if we can prove that. And it sounds kind of emotional, probably like it might be what's called a logical fallacy, which we're going to talk about next week. So I think A is not a great fact. It's kind of an opinion, right? More than a fact. The annual percentage rate, APR, is normally included in the application's fine print. So that's that number that, sometimes when you get a new credit card, if you've ever had this experience, they say, oh, 0.0% one, APR. That means basically if you have a balance on your credit card, that's the amount of interest you're going to pay. And then, oh, wow, surprise, after 1 year period, it goes up to 22%, so that's really important. And that is a fact. I think normally that's included in the application. You could find that. So you could see the APR, what it is when you start, which they're going to advertise in big. And then in the fine print, they're going to tell you, oh, after 18 months or whatever, it triples or goes up to 20% or whatever. So this is important. It's a fact. Certified public accountant Carl Schumacher urges his clients to read the fine print. Yeah, that's probably good. Carl Schumacher is an accountant, a CPA. He probably knows a lot about finance, I hope. And so that's a good authority on this, but we're not looking for an authority here. We're just looking for a fact. So this is the best choice. B would be the best fact to support our claim. Let's look at each one of these. This is going to be our long video for the week. The others are not going to be as long as this, I promise, but there's a little bit to cover here. These 5 methods, I think they're really important and can be useful in your writing. And not only in my class, but anytime you're trying to persuade someone. Method number 2, authority. Refer to an authority. So we want to prove our point, and we want to do it by referring to somebody who's an authority in the field. We're writing a paper about asthma. I don't know if you know this, but it's a very serious illness. A lot of times people think it's just kind of a minor respiratory thing like having allergies, but it can kill people, right? It's very serious. So to prove this, you might get the authority, you might speak to an emergency room doctor. Maybe a lot of times they see patients, or you could just find maybe somebody from an expert, and you could quote them from the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. But you see how we're bringing in somebody who's an authority, or if you want to use the word expert, refer to an expert, that's fine too. And it supports, because I'm not an expert in allergies, but I can quote somebody else who is. I can even interview and talk to somebody who is. All right, back to our credit card application. Now I want you to read your credit card application. So I'm going to try to get an authority, because guess what? Letter B is not correct. That's not the correct answer. Even if you want to be kind to me, I'm not the right person to talk to. I told you to read the fine print, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a finance person. I'm an English and rhetoric person. Um, Letter A, Darren Johnson, a professional wrestler. We love Darren Johnson, the Mountain. I love the movies he was in and everything. I think he's a made up. I think I made this up, but suggests that reading the fine print on credit card applications would save him lots of trouble. Well, again, he's a celebrity theoretically. If this is an imaginary celebrity, professional wrestler, he's in movies and TV shows, but I don't know how much he knows about finance. We don't know for sure. He could, but we're not sure. Certified public accountant Carl Schumacher urges his clients to read the fine print. So I would say C is the best choice here of an expert or an authority, because we know that hopefully if you're a CPA, you know a little bit more about finance than the average person. All right, let's keep going. Number 3, examples. Remember, examples just need to be general enough to kind of be persuasive. Jefferson High School, you want to convince your reader to provide more funds for women's sports. And Jefferson High School had 60 female students who wanted to join women's basketball and softball teams. So that's a good number. It's not like 1 or 2, and that's a good example. Let's look at our credit card application again. And again, if you want to pause this and read through these, and you can see which one might be a good choice. These are 3 ways that you could use examples to support the claim. Remember, I'm trying to convince you to read the fine print on your credit card application. So here's one of these 3 might work. All right, if you did pause it or not, that's fine. Let's look at number 1. Number 1's the best choice, letter A rather. Consumers paid billions in hidden charges during the 12 months that ended March 31st. So hidden charges mean they're things that you would have known probably if you read the fine print. But because you didn't read the fine print, all these people, not you, but these people, paid billions in hidden charges. So that's very persuasive. Billions of dollars. That must have been a lot of people who didn't read the fine print, and they ended up paying the price literally for that. So A would be a good choice of an example. My Uncle Ralph, he was charged a high interest rate by the high finance bank. And, they didn't even mention about anything to Uncle Ralph when he signed up for the card at the high finance bank. So it's one person, though. It's not bad. It's anecdotal. It's okay. But this is much better because we have this wide sample. Lots and lots of people messed up, basically, and paid all these hidden charges. Last one. Many people read the fine print on credit cards application only after they have a problem. Well, that's just kind of a fact. It's not really an example. It's just, okay, that's probably true, but it's not an example. It supports our claim. So B is the best answer. We just have a couple more. Predicting the consequences. This is my favorite persuasive method because I think it's like the most persuasive thing in the world because I can remember as a child my parents telling me, if you don't stop doing that right now, and then they would tell me about some consequences that were going to occur if I wasn't behaving. And I probably did the same thing with my kids. And we can do this positively too. If you would just clean your room and just do your homework, these are some good things that might happen. So predicting the consequences, here we have a little more academic. You want to convince a reader that college education should be free. If bright but economically deprived students cannot attend college because they can't afford it, our society will be robbed of their talent. So we're making a prediction. If we don't help students become, getting through college, we're gonna have a weaker society because of it. We're not gonna have a successful society because we're not gonna have enough educated people to fill the jobs and do the things that need to be done. So making a prediction is very persuasive. It makes people imagine, and if you can make them imagine either a dark or a bright future, it can really get them to swing into action. Okay, so again, I want you to read that fine print on the credit card application. How am I going to predict the consequences to do that? So again, if you want to look at these 3, A, B, C, one of these I think would be good, the others not so much. Number 1, if you are aware of all the conditions you are agreeing to, when you sign up for a new card, you will make a better decision that may save you a lot of money. So let's compare that to the second one. If you don't read the fine print on all credit card applications, this sounds very absolute, like our absolute claim, you're likely to lose everything and end up totally destitute, right? Meaning like homeless, broke. So this is a little too strong, I think, and it seems kind of emotional for me. So I'm going to say this is a better one. A is a better choice. And C, so many Americans have multiple credit cards these days. Very true, but it doesn't make any prediction about consequences, right? So it's either A or B. And again, what you'll see in academic writing, if it seems a little too emotional, it probably is. And it's probably better to be a little more measured and just careful and basically not stating anything that you can't really back up, so to speak, because this would be very hard to prove, right? This one, though, is pretty easy to prove. You could give examples of people who made the better decisions, but really trying to find people who've lost everything and are homeless because they didn't read the fine print, that would be very hard to prove, right? So A is a good consequence in my mind. Last one, number 5, answering the opposition. Remember, we said you should assume your audience for this paper, we're writing essay 3, does not agree with you. They don't agree with you, and you're trying to convince them. So first, assume that they don't agree, and then start from there. Now for this one, you want to convince your readers that you're candidate. So you're writing an essay about politics, and you really support this one candidate. And so you want to convince the audience that they should vote for this guy or this gal. And some have criticized him for running a low-key campaign. In other words, people say he's boring, right? But he feels that the issues and his stand on them should speak for themselves. So his policies, his actions, he feels like that should speak louder than his words. So again, we're defending something. We're answering the opposition. We're saying, I know you don't like this guy. You think he's too boring and low-key. But when you look at the issues and how he votes and what he does, that speaks for itself. He's a good candidate. So again, answering the opposition is assuming someone disagrees with you and trying to answer that. Once again, last one, I want you to read the application when you apply for a credit card. I want you to read the fine print. So here's how could I answer the opposition, because I'm assuming you don't want to read the fine print. Take a look at these A, B, and C and decide which one. Now letter C, let's just rule that out right away. It's just insulting. And if you're being sarcastic and insulting in academic writing, it's probably some kind of a logical fallacy, most likely, or it's just not going to help your ethos. Insulting people is not usually a good way to persuade them. Maybe if you're a football coach, so I don't know. People have different philosophies of that, but in academic writing, it's probably not going to persuade anybody. So let's rule out letter C, and I should kind of slap myself for putting an insulting, sarcastic answer here, because that's not a good one. But letter A and B, let's look at those. Some say reading the fine print on credit card applications isn't necessary. So that's our opposition, right? They don't agree with us. But those people are probably working for the credit card companies and spreading their lies, ! Sounds kind of emotional, sounds kind of insulting, kind of like a conspiracy theory almost. Let's look at letter B. Although some people say you don't need to read the fine print on credit card applications, taking a little time to understand could save you a lot of money in the long run, right? So or later. So that sounds pretty reasonable. It's just this could help you, right? I'm not 100% saying that it will, but it could help you. And so letter B is our better choice. And again, so we have these 5 methods of persuasion, and any way you can bring those into the body of your essay, it really can help your paper to be more persuasive. So I know that's a lot in this video. If you got to the end, give yourself a pat on the back. And if you have any questions about any of the methods of persuasion we talked about, or anything else, send me an email and I will stop the video here. Thanks for watching this.